indifference curve analysis. At class 12 level, we are just going to introduce some basic things about this topic. But when you go to the university, you will find that this topic is one of the most important topic of nearly every topic in microeconomics. Before I start this topic, I'd like to emphasize throughout the explanation of this topic, we make an important assumption that consumer consumes only two goods. I told you earlier, this is our limitation. This is the limitation of geometry. We are going to represent this concept on a diagram. And diagram has its own limitations. We have only two axes, X and Y. Therefore, we can show at the most only two goods, X and Y, on this. So throughout we are going to assume that the consumer consumes only two goods. Remember, this assumption seems to be little unrealistic. But if we go into the practice, we will find that this is not that unrealistic as we may think. For example, in your family, you must have noticed your parents making this statement quite often. खाने पर ही इतने पैसे निकल जाते हैं, तो बाकी चीजों के लिए पैसे बहुत कम पड़ते हैं. So what is in their mind? In their mind, there are two groups of goods. One, food items. Second, non-food items. So if you just think not only in terms of two goods, but in terms of two groups of goods, this assumption will not look much unrealistic. Explanation of this topic involves basically the explanation of two main concepts. One is concept of indifference curve, and second is concept of budget line. First, we will take up the concept of indifference curve. What does it mean? Before we define what an indifference curve is, let us first take an example which will ultimately lead us to the meaning of the concept of indifference curve. We take a numerical example in which we are going to assume that a consumer consumes only two goods. The numerical example is before you. The numerical example is entitled Indifference Schedule. I hope you know the meaning of schedule. You have passed through 11th class and you know schedule simply means a table giving you some information. So this is an indifference schedule. We have 4 columns. A column showing different combinations, the names of different combinations, then good X and good Y. The two make a combination. So for example, first combination is 1x plus 8y. Second combination is 2x plus 4y. Third combination is 3x plus 2y. Fourth combination is 4x plus 1y. Remember, these are all 4 combinations. What does the fourth column means? We will take up a little later. First, let us concentrate only on these combinations. अब एक बात आपको ध्यान में रखना पड़ेगा, ये टेबल हमने कोई अपनी मर्जी से ही नहीं बना ली है। इसको बनाने के पीछे कुछ बातें हम मान कर चले हैं। This table is based on certain assumptions. One of the basic assumption and the fundamental assumption is, just don't forget that assumption, because you will need that assumption again and again. If there is any question on indifference curve analysis, just keep in mind, what do these different combinations have in common? Now I come to that assumption. The assumption is that total utility, I hope you know the meaning of utility by now, satisfaction, derived from the consumption of each combination. Let me repeat. Total utility derived from the consumption of the two goods in each combination is the same. What does it mean? 1x plus 8y की total utility 2x plus 4y की total utility के बराबर है। 2x plus 4y की utility 3x plus 2y 4x plus 1y के बराबर है। तो कुल मिलाकर क्या बात बनी? Utility from A is equal to utility from B is equal to utility from C is equal to utility from D. मैं इस बात को बार बार एम्फेसाइज क्यों कर रहा हूं? क्योंकि आपके दिमाग में ये बात बैठ जानी चाहिए। It must go into your mind that all the combinations shown in this table have the same level of satisfaction, because this will provide answer to many other questions raised. For example, one question that may come into your mind is, if you increase the quantity of X, why are you decreasing the quantity of Y? That is one question which will automatically come into your mind. The answer is found in that basic assumption. Remember, if I increase the quantity of X and keep the quantity of Y is the same, what will happen to the total utility from combination B? Total utility from combination B will be more than the total utility of combination A. Why? Because the quantity of goods and services consumed in B is higher than in A. So it is necessary that if I increase the quantity of one good, I must reduce the quantity of the other good. Why? The reason is clear, so that total utility from each combination remains the same. एक दूसरा सवाल आपके दिमाग में आएगा। चलिए, मान लिया कम करना जरूरी है, y को कम करना जरूरी है। अगर हम x को बढ़ाते हैं तो y को कम करना जरूरी है। If we increase the x, it is necessary that we must reduce the consumption of y. अब एक दूसरा सवाल, you have reduced 4y for the second x. Second x is here. When you move from 1 to 2, you are moving to the second x. I have removed only 2y when I move to the third x, from 2 to 3. I have deducted only 1y when I move to the fourth x. Why is it so? ऐसा क्यों है? Why are we subtracting 4y when we move to the second x? Subtracting 2y when we are moving to the third x? Subtracting 1y when we are moving to the fourth x. Now, this takes us to another important assumption. Before we take up that assumption, let us give some name to the deduction from y and consequent addition of x. It is also an important concept, and it is called marginal rate of substitution. Marginal, I have written in brief here. Remember, MRS means marginal rate of substitution. देखिए इन वर्ड्स का मतलब क्या है? What do these words mean? Why it is called substitution? We are calling it substitution because we are taking x in place of y. We are substituting x in place of y. This is why it's called substitution. Rate, I have just told you, for second x, we are substituting 4. We are giving up 4y. For the third x, we are giving up 2y. And for the fourth x, we are giving up 1y. This giving up 4y, then 2y, then 1y is the rate. So we have understood the meaning of the two words, why it is called rate. Because the rate at which y is sacrificed, the rate at which y is sacrificed in order to obtain one more unit of x. एक सवाल और आपके दिमाग में आ सकता है, that there can be another question in your mind. Why you are adding every time only 1x? I am adding every time only 1x because I want to bring in the concept of marginal change. And remember, I'll repeat it every time the word marginal comes. Marginal change means one more, or maybe one less if we move the other way around. But broadly, when we take the example, we take one more. So it means one more. This is why we are taking one more x, one more when we move from one combination to another. This is the meaning attached to the marginal. So the concept is marginal rate of substitution, the rate at which one commodity is sacrificed to obtain one more unit of the other commodity. The way we calculate marginal rate of substitution is here. MRS is equal to change in the quantity of the good willing to sacrifice. The consumer is willing to sacrifice Y divided by change in the quantity of the good willing to obtain. Consumer is willing to obtain 1x. So broadly, this is the method. Remember, these Y and X are irrelevant. In our example, we have taken Y. We could take A, we could take B, we could take C. कुछ भी ले सकते थे. So that is immaterial. Whenever you have to learn what is MRS, don't say delta Y upon delta X. Say the change in quantity willing to sacrifice divided by change in quantity willing to obtain. In brief, the term means this: delta sacrificed divided by delta obtained. Since in our example, Y is sacrificed and X is obtained, therefore, this becomes delta Y upon delta X. This becomes delta Y upon delta X. Now, so far we have learnt marginal rate of substitution. We have learnt marginal rate of substitution. Now, this rate is written here. 4y is to 1x. When we move from combination A to combination B, what do we find? Give up 4y, change in the quantity of good willing to sacrifice, and we take up change in the quantity of good willing to obtain. In place of 4y, we obtain 1x. Similarly, in the next combination, in place of 2y, we obtain 1x in place of 1y. So we call this marginal rate of substitution. It will be equal to 4, equal to 2, equal to 1. Now, notice another important thing in this table. Most probably you must have already noticed it. Why is this MRS falling? I hope you must have learned the concept of MRS by now. Now what do you find in this table? Why is MRS falling? Why it is moving from 4 to 2 and 2 to 1? Now, MRS simply means, let me repeat, the amount of Y the consumer is willing to sacrifice in order to obtain one more unit of X. Let us now come back to a simple law of demand as applied in practice. If the quantity of a good with you increases, let me repeat, if the quantity of a good with you increases, what happens to its marginal utility? According to the law of diminishing marginal utility falls. अब क्या connection पाते हैं आप इसमें? If you have more of a commodity, the marginal utility falls, right? If marginal utility falls, you try to equate what you will like to pay with the marginal utility. You will like to pay is nothing but how much units of y you will like to sacrifice. So in order to obtain one more unit of x, you are willing to sacrifice less of y. Why? Because from the one more unit of x, your marginal utility will be lower than it was earlier. This explains why MRS falls as the quantity of x with the consumer increases. Remember now, let us now summarize or come to some conclusion. This table, which is called indifference schedule, why it is called indifference schedule? अब तक शायद आपके दिमाग में आ गया होगा. It is called indifference schedule because each combination in this table gives the consumer same level of satisfaction. If you ask the consumer, which one of the combinations will you select? इन सब में से आप कौन सा combination लेना चाहेंगे? What will be the answer of the consumer? Consumer will say, give me any of the combinations. Why will consumer say so? The reason is clear. From each combinations, he gets the same utility, and consumer is concerned only with the utility. Since each combination is giving the same utility, the consumer is indifferent. Now comes the meaning of the word indifferent. The consumer is indifferent between these four combinations. This is why this schedule has been named as indifference schedule. So this schedule is based on two things, two assumptions. One, as more of x is obtained, something of y, remember something, I am not asking about the rate, something of y must be sacrificed. So that, why? What is the reason behind it? Something of y must be sacrificed. I think you must be knowing the reason by now. Something of y must be sacrificed so that total utility from the combination remains unchanged. Okay, that is one assumption. If you obtain one more unit of x, some units of y must be sacrificed. The second assumption stems from the first. Sacrificed at what rate? He is willing to give up y at what rate? The answer is at falling rate. And what is this rate called? This rate is called MRS, marginal rate of substitution. Why should MRS fall? Let me remind. MRS must fall because of the law of diminishing marginal utility. So the second assumption on which this table is based is that MRS must fall throughout. So this table is based on two assumptions. Now, before we move on to another concept, एक छोटी सी बात जो कि जिसमें मैथमेटिक्स ज़्यादा है, इकोनॉमिक्स कम है, वो समझना जरूरी है. Note that when we give up 4y, then this is minus. When we obtained more x, this is plus. So the answer should be minus. But I have not written minus here. The reason is we are not concerned with the sign. We take this table without, it should be minus 4y, it should be minus 2y, it should be minus 1y. When we compare these combinations, we take only the absolute values in mathematical terms, absolute value, that is ignoring the signs attached. तो ये सवाल क्योंकि आप मैथमेटिक्स भी पढ़ते हैं, आपके दिमाग में आएगा जरूर कि ये तो माइनस में आना चाहिए. तो इन दैट वे -2 is greater than -4, -1 is greater than -2. तो MRS बढ़ कहाँ रहा है? MRS तो घट रहा है. तो when MRS तो बढ़ रहा है, तो लेकिन हम यहाँ पर ये कहना जरूरी है कि we ignore the sign while we take the value of MRS. तो हम जो है इसको इग्नोर करते हैं, इसको दिमाग में लेते ही नहीं. तो we take only the absolute value of MRS and then compare. Now, this was about indifference schedule. Now remember, in economics, we use lot of curves. I will advise you not to give first importance to the curve. Give second importance to the curve. Reason? What is important first to understand the concept. What we are going to do in the curve is simply what? We are simply going to represent what we have already said in the form of a diagram. We can explain a concept without the use of a diagram. आपके दिमाग में सवाल आएगा, why do we use diagram then? There is no necessity. Necessity is diagram makes the things simpler. उससे चीजें थोड़ी सिंपल बन जाती हैं, लेकिन वो सिंपल जब ही बनती हैं जब आप पहले कॉन्सेप्ट समझ चुके हो. इसलिए जो भी टॉपिक आप पढ़ें, कर्व पर बाद में जाएं, यू टेक द कर्व लेटर. First try to understand the concept, then you will understand the formation of a curve better than if you start with a curve and then come to the concept. So after this concept of indifference schedule, we now come to our another concept, that is concept of I am writing in brief, concept of indifference curve. I for indifference, C for curve. So remember, this indifference curve is simply the graphic presentation of this table. This table may differ. But when we draw this table on the form of a graph, it will have sort of a unique shape. And what is that unique shape? Let us take. I'm not matching this with this. Remember, in examination, it is not necessary that your indifference curve must be based on the schedule you have drawn. If you are asked to draw a schedule and then explain the concept of indifference curve, it is not necessary that you match the two. So this is indifference curve. Don't forget to represent, let us say, good X, good Y. Remember, a good X and good Y are not, let us say, permanent things. It may be good A, good B. It may be good Y here and good X here. What is important is the two X's. So when